The manatees, they're probably the most gentle, large, but powerful animal I can ever imagine. I don't think, from my perspective, they're not capable of being aggressive. There were more manatees that died in 2021 than we had alive in 1978. And I hope people will be mad, as I am. I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm angry, but the science is on our side. It's clear why these problems exist, and it should be clear to anybody who cares about Florida and its environment. The more people realize that to join with this cause to protect the environment is going to help their quality of life, I think we'll get it done.
It's time to change the world. It's time for something better. We're telling the stories of people who are changing the world and how you can help. Our daily actions have a massive impact, so what will we do about it? We can remake the world, because guess what? We can. Hi everyone, I'm Nathan Gardner, and this is We Can Remake the World, a podcast about people who are changing the world and how you can help. Hope all of you are staying healthy and as calm as possible amidst more world events that we can't fully control and that we certainly didn't see coming. I know all of us are thinking of ways to be part of the solution when it comes to the people in Ukraine and other conflicts like Yemen as well that we need to be talking about and conscious of and doing what we can to ease the suffering of people on the ground. Thank you to all of you out there who are doing what you can, who are donating, supporting, sending donated goods, hosting people in your homes, refugees, which is amazing. Let's remember to stay focused on peace as much as we can, encouraging peace where we can, not getting drawn into conflict and finger-pointing too much, even where blame is justified. And let's remember that as we focus on peace and talk about peace and do all we can to start seeing peace, that's when we really get to a better place. Getting drawn into more conflict and escalating conflict and using weapons as a means to further the conversation is only going to take us down a path of more war, more conflict. So let's remember that we have other options and speak that aloud to make that part of the public discourse so that it's not just about answering war with war. We here at the show are sending constant prayers, so to speak, and thoughts of peace to all conflicts around the world and keeping the innocent in our thoughts. Thanks to all of you out there who are doing your part. And now let's get to the good news for today, which we do at the beginning of every episode. First up, scientists and researchers may have discovered a powerful way to prevent the spread of HIV, both between people for new infections and also within those who have already been infected, to stop the spread from growing in their bodies, to kind of halt the virus in its tracks. And it's not a pharmaceutical, it's a fruit. A certain lectin in bananas has been shown to prevent the HIV virus from entering human cells, and it has been shown to create powerful protection against HIV transmission as well. A banana-based microbicide designed to prevent pathogens when being passed between people has been proven to be as effective as two other major products already in use out there. But the banana-based product doesn't have any of the same negative side effects that the current products already in use have. Banana-based products are also much cheaper to produce and to sell, which is huge news for economies around the world who maybe don't have access to pharmaceuticals as readily. The other good news here is that recent research is actually showing bananas to be a powerful inhibitor for several other viruses as well, not just HIV, including the family of herpes viruses, cytomegalovirus, hepatitis C, multiple flu viruses, Ebola, and it's even expected to help prevent and minimize COVID by binding to the primary COVID protein responsible for infection and illness, and similar to the other viruses, preventing it from infecting human cells and growing within the body. This research, if carried forward and applied across the world effectively, could save millions of lives, especially when many viruses around the world seem to be becoming more and more common. There are huge global health benefits in play here. So, eat more bananas, everyone. My partner and I were actually just doing a mono-eating cleanse where you eat only bananas and then optional lettuce every day, along with some celery juice and some water with lemon juice squeezed into it. And both of us felt a lot of positive benefits from it. And when I read this, I was like, well, there are some added benefits that we weren't aware of. So maybe explore a little bit about this mono-eating cleanse. You can find out more about it from the author Anthony William. I know it's helped a lot of people out there, especially with digestive issues and skin conditions and all kinds of things. So check it out. I mean, even if you're not worried about viral infections of any kind, listen, if a banana can stop all these viruses in their tracks, imagine what else it does for the body. Pretty cool. Next up, we go to South Korea for progress being made in renewable energy, which is always encouraging, especially when it happens on a large scale. So we learned about a recently constructed floating power plant that was built in the Hapcheon province, which is a county in South Korea, to eventually supply up to 60,000 local homes with power, which is roughly the total population of this county. So the entire county could be powered by solar renewable energy. This is the newest addition to a growing number of floating solar power structures around the world, many of them, the largest of them as well, in India and China. Power plants supplied by floating solar panels can be up to 10% more efficient than other power plants because the water naturally cools the system, so there's no need for coolant and sort of flow of water to cool the power plant's operations, which is very common in all power plants. It also contributes to water retention if these panels are built over natural or man-made water reservoirs, which are used to supply local regions with fresh water, which has big implications for regions like California, which is still experiencing a drought in parts of the state. So there's a lot of potential and a myriad of benefits here. The plant in South Korea, specifically in Hapcheon, is unique because it's supplied by 92,000 solar panels, which are shaped in patterns to resemble the plum blossom, which is the symbol of this county in South Korea, adding a little bit to local pride. I think part of the reason they did this as well to honor the locals is that they were tapped to contribute about $1.4 million total, the equivalent of, to help fund the project. So the local residents are actually part of the investing community involved here, which created more capital for the project and then also promised a 10% return on investment to those residents who chose to invest. I love projects like this, which are good for the planet, good for the people who are building it, and good for the local economy. That holistic benefit, I think, is what we always want to see. Now let's get to today's episode, where we highlight what is probably my favorite animal on the planet. Do you remember the animals that you loved as a child? Remember how mysterious and amazing elephants seemed when you'd see them in movies or on TV? How majestic and awe-inspiring lions were? Do you remember going to the zoo, maybe, if you lived near one or were able to visit one, and seeing animals like jaguars and eagles and gorillas up close just a few feet away, and how incredible it felt to see them just behave in their natural way and move so close to you? Was there one animal that you really loved, maybe? For some unexplainable reason, there was a bird or a lizard or an ocean or land animal that you just fixated on. Maybe parrots or dolphins or orangutans or something more common like a type of dog or a large cat or even small cat like a lynx. For me, that infatuation was manatees. Starting around age 5, I somehow learned about manatees. I still don't know how. And from that point on, I was hooked. I remember doing school projects on manatees any chance I could get to learn more about them. I had several stuffed animals that were manatees. I made a 5-foot-long pillow for a school project with manatee printed fabric that I somehow found at the local craft store. This is in Michigan, so I have no idea what manatee fabric was doing at a suburban craft store there. But somehow I found it. I have no idea what drew me to manatees when I was young, but I know what draws me to them now. Manatees may be the most peaceful animals on Earth. I've been lucky enough to spend time with them in the wild, and they're even more calming and beautiful up close than I thought they would be. Adult manatees are special in that they have no natural predators. Even though they swim in shark and alligator-infested waters, manatees are not prey for any other living thing. They're also not predators. They eat only marine plants. They might defend themselves or their young, if they need to, by swimming powerfully and quickly away, if they're startled or if they feel threatened, but they're never aggressive. They move through their lives in peace, as highly intelligent and social beings. They learn tasks at a similar level to dolphins, and they have really good long-term memories, like their closest mammal relative, the elephant. Manatees are also mammals. They basically sleep, eat, communicate with each other, and play. In our world, as it is, encountering animals who are so consistently peaceful is welcome and an inspiration, I think. But despite being so peaceful, and having inhabited coastlines around the world for millennia, we are in danger of losing them in certain areas. Manatees can live natural lives of over 60 and 70 years, but they often don't make it past 20. Humans are the number one cause of premature death, hardship, and habitat loss for manatees, but we don't have to be. The Florida manatee specifically has been in trouble for decades. In the 1970s, there were just a few hundred manatees left in the wild, but over decades of awareness and education and protections being put in place, conservation efforts being listed as an endangered species, the manatees rebounded through some hard work by some people on the ground, until last year, when over 1,100 manatees died of starvation due to a massive die-off of seagrasses on Florida's east coast, which is a major food source for manatees. But this goes way beyond manatees. Many in the scientific and conservation communities who are locals in Florida and who study this from around the world believe that this massive manatee die-off is a symptom of a much greater problem. An alarm bell sounding to tell us that major ecosystems off the coasts of Florida are dying or in danger, and that we need to be concerned about life in these coastal areas, which includes not just sources of food for wildlife and sustenance for them, but also for people, local fisheries, and that we need to be concerned about our water quality, again, for both wildlife and natural habitats and ecosystems, but also for humans. Today we go to Florida to speak with Patrick Rose, the executive director of the Save the Manatee Club, a local Florida nonprofit and one of the world's leading manatee conservation organizations. Founded in 1981 by the American singer and songwriter Jimmy Buffett and then Governor of Florida Bob Graham, Save the Manatee Club is a hugely influential protector of Florida's diverse but threatened wildlife, beyond just manatees. The organization focuses on manatees, but also works to protect natural water sources, coastal ecosystems, other species, and much more. Patrick helps us understand that when manatees are in trouble, we're all in trouble, and how saving the manatee is actually an opportunity to save ourselves. Perfect. So we are speaking today with Patrick Rose, Executive Director of Save the Manatees Club, which is headquartered in Florida. And Patrick, I'm not only excited to speak to you today because of, I think, what is a very important conservation conversation focused around manatees, but with a lot of greater implications, but also because I have been sort of obsessed with manatees since I was about 5 years old. There's a manatee picture right here, which you may see. I just had this unexplainable attachment to these creatures from a very young age, and I'm just really grateful for your time and excited to chat with you today.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and really my infatuation with manatees began as a elementary school, so I can understand that.
Yeah, I grew up in Michigan. I have no idea how I even became exposed to I think it was through the Beanie Babies. There was a manatee Beanie Baby. Something about that animal just, yeah.
Well, and we also have had one of the longest lasting 5K runs that we've ever had is out of Michigan. So we've had folks there that have been really avid supporters and putting on races. I think we're into maybe going to be in their 19th year.
Wow.
Hopefully I haven't missed that. So that, that's pretty significant. I myself grew up in Independence, Missouri. So the manatees will accept help from wherever they can get it, and of course they've needed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so to that point, I mean, in a moment we'll talk about a lot of the challenges that are in play in Florida for the manatees and more broadly too, but I'd really like to start on a positive note if you're open to it. I'd love to hear from you about what makes manatees so special. Why are they worth caring about and protecting? And, what do you love about them? You work so closely with them every day. I would love to hear your thoughts there.
Well, being an aquatic biologist by training, but my respect and appreciation for all aquatic life started well before my formal education. And when I did learn about manatees as a child, and then later, I also was a scuba diver and underwater photographer and so forth. So it was natural for me to want to learn more about them in their presence. And I will say, they can reach more than 10 feet in length. They can actually be over 3,000 pounds. Let's say a pregnant female can be up there. An average manatee is probably closer to 1,000 or 1,100. And they're long-lived if they're allowed to live out their natural life. They can live more than 60 years. They, sadly, though, tend to die more in their teen years overall because there's so many problems. But we'll stay away from that for the moment and go back to, they're probably the most gentle, large, but powerful animal I can ever imagine. I don't think, from my perspective, they're not capable of being aggressive. They, again, they're strong. They'll, a mother will protect a calf by swimming away or putting herself between it, but they wouldn't attack anything. And they're vegetarians, and so that's where they would eat. Their primary diet is seagrasses and other aquatic vegetation. And so I like to think of them as the gardeners of the seagrass meadows, because when they're allowed to free range the way that they have evolved with those seagrass communities over millions of years, they're actually increase the productivity of the seagrass. And so when we talk about that later and why it's, where man steps in and sort of interferes with that. And so my first time that I saw a manatee underwater, it was not such clear water. So I knew they were there, so I was swimming a little bit towards them, then I would wait and see what happened. The first thing I saw was a big scar on the manatee, though, because the water wasn't very clear and the scar was a light color against the gray skin of the manatee. And that I already knew about them, but that just sort of cemented it for me, that I was going to need to devote more of my life. I was still in college at that point in time. But it helped me know that when I got finished and got my education where I wanted it to be, that was going to be one of the first things I worked on. And I've always connected the aquatic ecosystem protection with saving manatees. They have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's some reasons for that, which we'll talk about in a moment, just how uniquely connected they are to coastal ecosystems. They have to be. It's part of how they're designed. So we'll talk about that. But I just, in my own experience, they are the most peaceful creatures. They're almost like the embodiment of peace in the animal kingdom. And I love that they have no natural predators like other animals, which could be very predatory. Just sort of, leave them alone, get out of the way.
Right.
Alligators making way for manatees. I just love that image. And you raised something that I want to touch on quickly before we move on, but just those scars. And I visited Florida for one of my birthdays. My partner and I went snorkeling with manatees because it's something I'd always wanted to do. And almost every adult manatee you see has scars. And to me, it's this symbol. It's this, it is a symbol of this animal and their relationship to humans and our relationship to the natural world, I think. And it affects you, if you're around these animals and you see how many scars are on these creatures, literal scars, and which is directly from us. And so before we go into what happened last year in 2021 and the urgency of this conversation, what are those scars all about? What causes them, and why is it that just about every manatee has them?
Right. So many of them, the majority, are from the actual propellers of boats, and they can get them at lower speeds, but generally it's coming from a fast-moving boat. So the manatee doesn't have time to get out of the way, or the boater doesn't have time to avoid the manatee. But what's not known as well is that about 60% of the manatees that die from boating accidents and impacts with boats actually come from the high-speed impact. And so it might not even make a scar, but it can break their ribs, you can hit them in the head, puncture lungs. So they endure these incredible, insults to their survivability. But somehow manatees, in so many cases, when you think about the fact that 90-some% likely of the living manatees have been scarred once. So I think about it in terms of they've been within an inch or so of losing their lives, but yet they've persisted, they remain. And so, yeah, they're doing their part, but we've got to do a better job on our end of it. So we have made a lot of progress over the years in terms of speed zones and no entry zones and sanctuaries and so forth, but it's still a small fraction of the overall habitat that manatees utilize. And so we need to rely on boaters, whether or not they're in a speed zone formally, to be watching out, doing what they can to avoid hitting a manatee, slowing down, especially in the seagrass beds. And just really that's where you're likely to see the manatees, and they're going to be foraging in those seagrass beds and so forth. So it just makes no sense to be operating fast over the top of seagrass, and it's also harmful to the seagrass beds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think what you're speaking about is a point of encouragement, because once people realized the fact that these boats were having such a detrimental effect on manatee populations, legislation came into play. People became more aware. The mindset started to change, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but historically the manatee numbers started to come back up after we tackled that problem and at least made progress if we haven't solved it.
Yeah, some of the two most important things that happened, actually, so if you go back a little further in it, let's look at the federal laws. There was Endangered Species Act that was adopted in 1973. And just before that, 1972, the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So those were helpful on a larger sense, but they didn't get down to the specific protections. Made it illegal to kill them, to harass them, or do other harmful things to them, but they were more general. In 1978, Florida passed the Manatee Sanctuary Act, and in my case, I worked really hard on that. In fact, the year before that, we had a little more. We started doing aerial surveys of all the different power plants, and also worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that was doing work at the springs and other places that manatees used, especially in the wintertime, because in addition to the boating problem, cold stress is a major issue that can kill manatees. If they can't get to either one of the artificial warm water sites at the power plants or the natural springs, many can die from cold stress. And so what we focused on were those places where manatees aggregated the most, and we only had around 800 or 900 manatees then. And when we started to really work at earnest to try to prevent them from literally going extinct. So with those early protections, we were able to protect the places that were most critical to manatees, and that was extremely helpful. Over the years, we've expanded it and we've done more, but Florida has continued to grow and develop in our human population, and therefore human activities increased dramatically. I would love to say we kept pace with that, but we really haven't. Florida has continued to grow more unsustainably. So there are more adverse impacts to the habitat and to manatees over those intervening decades. But with the work we were doing and the many partners together, the population really had rebounded from about 800 to 1,000 to probably a little over 8,000. So that was wonderful. But if you look back at about 2009, we sort of were really on a nice upward trajectory until then. But really since 2010, it's been really marginal. And we started to see some of our dire concerns become realities. And so eventually we'll get to the catastrophic things happening on the East Coast because man did not protect those seagrass communities, allowed the harmful algal blooms to be prolific there and shade out the seagrass and kill it, which has resulted literally in it. There were more manatees that died in 2021 than we had alive in 1978.
Yeah, I mean, let's go there. This is really why I reached out when I saw this in the news recently, that last year in 2021, there was a massive die-off of over 1,100 manatees, which, if the total population was just over 8,000, is almost 20% of the entire Florida population, which is hugely alarming and a huge deal because those numbers hadn't been seen at that level ever before. Is that right?
That's right. And on top of it, it was the first time we've ever had manatees dying of starvation, because when we looked at over the years, I was a member of each of the manatee recovery teams, and in my historical work, I was the first federal manatee recovery activities coordinator on a federal level. I went on to start and develop all the state of Florida programs for manatees and marine mammals, and retired from there in '96. And those were just years we accomplished so much and had so many good people working together, increasing our knowledge base in the science. And we were warning of this problem that really came to that crescendo over the last very few years, but last year, again, that catastrophe that happened. And I wish I could say, it came out of surprise, but it wasn't. In fact, we were telling the Fish and Wildlife Service in 2016, just before they downlisted manatees from endangered to threatened, because they were about 8 years late and recognizing where we were in 2009, and it probably could have been appropriate to downlist them in 2009 because we had had so much success. But by the time we got to 2017, it was so clear to us, and we were sharing this, and other scientists were sharing, that this catastrophe was in the making. But they went ahead and downlisted anyway. They promised to keep up their research and protection and staffing and funding, but really it didn't happen. And so there was some negligence involved. Today, we're working hand in hand with those partners. We're hoping we can make up, but we should never have been in this dilemma we're in.
There's a couple of things you spoke about that I wanted to touch on with you. The first is I was going to ask if you saw this coming, basically, if the scientific and conservation communities in Florida saw the signs. Because as I was doing research, it seemed like nature was giving us warnings. There was a huge algal bloom in 2011, brown
Yes.
tides every year since, like species of all kinds, especially on the east coast of Florida, perishing in massive amounts annually. And now the manatees are sort of the final alarm bell, maybe, before, this goes one step further, which I don't know what that would mean. I'm sure you would have a much better sense, but that was a question of mine. Did you see this coming? And I can't imagine how that must have felt to see these signs and, be raising the alarm and not be heard.
It was extremely frustrating. We also engaged with other scientists, and they also echoed our warning to the agencies. Sometimes you wonder, are they just wanting to... Well, actually, let me add a little more of what happened. So earlier, they had considered downlisting, but they put it off because really there hadn't been enough. But then came along, really around 2012, the Pacific Legal Foundation worked together with another group that was formed to fight manatee protection and to take away the protections we already had. And they sued the Fish and Wildlife Service because the service didn't go ahead and downlist manatees earlier. So in essence, the service rolled over to the Pacific Legal Foundation and agreed to downlist them.
Do you mind if I ask what their angle would have been? How would they benefit from that?
Well, their organization fights against protections from the Endangered Species Act all the time. They have a reputation for that. The local group had formed in order to fight new protections for manatees, but actually petitioned to have all manatee protections in the Kings Bay area, a very critical winter habitat for manatees, and in fact a year-round habitat. One of the first federal sanctuaries for manatees. They petitioned to have all those state rules removed entirely. And they were also fighting the new protections that were being planned back then and supported by the Fish and Wildlife Service. So it's an interesting aspect of it, because even as anti-manatee as that organization was and what they did, my life has been dedicated to trying to help manatees and work with whomever I can work with. We'll stand against those that are attacking or trying to pull away, but I try not to stop there. I'll work with folks and then try to change their minds over time. And actually that story has some positive elements of it. We now fast forward to 2022, and that organization's a different organization today. They went from being anti-manatee, forming to fight all protections for manatees, to today I can say they've been part of the solution in that area and helping to replant submerged aquatic vegetation and providing more food for manatees. I don't know if we're all completely on the same page, but we've come a long way, so I want to get that part of it in too.
That's great. No, that's really great to hear. So tell us more about what has been building to 2021 and some of the factors in play of the loss of manatee food sources and what that means for the wider ecosystem too, and what you see as contributing to it.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit why Florida should never have gone this route, because the seagrass communities, the water quality, that's everything to the fishing community. So they're going to be impacted. Those are the nursery grounds for the larval fishes and the other, arthropods and so forth that they are going to feed on as larval stages. And it draws people to come to Florida just to go out on the water, enjoy it, to swim, all those different things people come to Florida to recreate. And we have arguably up to 4 times the amount of visitors coming to Florida than we have who live here as residents. So it's a huge factor. I look at this kind of in the economic terms as if Florida, by growing unsustainably, has been mortgaging its environmental future. And now, with that getting so bad, it's really at a situation where on the East Coast is certainly nature is ready to foreclose. And I'm not sure if they can mount, an effort to be able to turn that around in time. It's probably a decade to undo what's been broken there, but that's if we get everybody working together to do it right. Let's extrapolate that to the whole state of Florida. So we're looking at not nearly such a bad situation on the West Coast today, but all the early signs are there. We're seeing shifts in species diversity away from seagrasses towards macroalgae, and then the next step is likely going to be those planktonic, algal blooms and species. We're already seeing increased persistence of red tide and the harmful impacts from that. And the phytoplankton blooms we've had on the East Coast are bad, and some of them can be toxic. But red tide is toxic, and it results virtually every time in fish kills, and we've lost up to 300 manatees from red tide blooms on the West Coast. And so we're just seeing more and more evidence that more of our ecosystems in Florida are declining, and it's because we have not been growing sustainably in Florida. So if we look at our water quality laws, they're not strong enough as they are, and they're not even being enforced at the weaker standards that they are set at. So we will eventually, I guess we can get into it, but one of the things that we are doing along with some other environmental organizations is we are filing federal lawsuits to, in this case, we've let the EPA know that we gave them the 60-day notice that we'll be filing a suit because we believe the water quality standards are insufficient and that the enforcement actions for that are not strong enough either. And those are so we need to combine the power of the Endangered Species Act. So the suit will actually be to require EPA to reinitiate formal Section 7 of the Endangered Species Act consultation with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, because it's clear and there's undeniable that the loss of the seagrasses, which is critical habitat for manatees, has caused hundreds and hundreds of manatees to die. So what's behind our suit should be pretty well understood, and it should be agreed to that because of the water quality problems and then therefore the harmful algal blooms, those standards are not strong enough and the enforcement's not. So we hope that what will happen from that lawsuit is we'll all sit down together and work on a solution and combine the power of the Clean Water Act together with the Endangered Species Act, and that will give us enough of an influence on even the state of Florida so that their water quality laws will be strong enough, and then the growth management standards and future development and permitting will have to come in line together with, of course, what should happen to and is going to happen is restoration work, where we're looking at once the water quality is at a place, we can start replanting and helping set the environment in a position to naturally recover as well.
I think one of the points behind what you're saying that's so important is that the manatees are a crucial part of this conversation, but it's also a symptom of a much greater problem which is affecting so much wildlife, which of course will affect humans as well. To think that this sign of manatee death and other wildlife death and plant death is not going to come back to the human population as far as loss of our own food sources. If right. Wildlife that we catch for economic or for sustenance reasons are gone or depleted, that if our water sources start to go, then what do we have? I mean, water is life. It's that saying is true. Would you tell us a little bit about the Piney Point disaster as an example of what might be contributing to these algal blooms, red tides, these circumstances where the waters are just dying before us and all of the wildlife as well?
Well, Piney Point is a good example, again, of Florida not growing sustainably, not paying its way as you go. So those were waste products from the creation of fertilizers, from phosphate. And so they had no safe way that they knew of how to dispose of them, so they started collecting them in just huge quantities in an area that wasn't, frankly, right at the edge of the bay in Tampa Bay.
And to make phosphate, you have like radioactive byproduct or something too, right? I think I read.
Yes, yeah. So, I mean it's a hodgepodge of all bad things, and so it's bad enough that they didn't even have a good plan to ever deal with it, but they kept creating them, and then companies can go in business and out of business, and then pretty soon you have that ticking time bomb literally right there. Yes, it had a liner under it that was supposed to keep any of that from coming through, but the liner tore. Whether it was exactly why it tore, I think, is up to debate, but it really kind of doesn't matter. It did, and it was always likely to be a problem. And we've had historical issues with too much rain and other things threatening these same kinds of disasters. So once that started pouring in, then they had to literally, to keep it from catastrophically collapsing, then they had to start dumping those polluted waters into the bay. That was their plan. That's horrible. And so that should have never been allowed to be that way, but it was. What the question is, are they going to learn from this and do things differently and safer in the future?
Yeah.
And I think we discussed maybe real briefly, other kind of no-brainer type things. We have a sugar industry in Florida that is being still, as far as I know, being subsidized to in essence, prop up their prices while they are still one of the major polluters, especially for Lake Okeechobee and the Everglades. And then when those discharges are into the St. Lucie Canal and also into the Caloosahatchee River, they're feeding two of our other estuaries and polluting those, in addition to the too much water or too little water, depending on what it is, how it affects the ecosystem. So there are many different examples of where we've mortgaged our future, and nature is essentially telling us, if you don't get your act together, we're going to foreclose on you.
Yeah, I mean, it really just seems like the waters around Florida are reaching a crisis point, and it's like the alarm bells are very clearly and very loudly ringing. And there's this great video I found on the Save the Manatee website that shows about a 3-minute clip of what's going on around Lake Okeechobee and the forced sort of, distribution of these polluted waters to the east and west of Florida from the center, from the lake, because of agriculture, from big sugar and maybe other contributors too, which is just leading to massive pollution on the east coast of Florida and the west coast, and contributing to a lot of these algal blooms and, putting fertilizer materials into the water where they don't belong. And the Piney Point disaster too, just the idea that the solution was to just release millions of gallons of toxic water into the bay. If I were a Florida resident, I would just be furious. I mean, the fact that was the only solution, it's insane to me. And I think I read that over 1,600 tons of debris in the form of both wildlife carcasses of living things as well as plants has been dredged already. And I'm sure there's more, but it's completely insane.
Well, and their long-term solution, I'm not an expert on this, but I'm very wary of what they're trying to do. They want to start injecting these deep into the earth. It's their way of kind of out of sight, out of mind. I think there are serious concerns about that. They're missing the point. You shouldn't have all of this waste and this being produced. And again, what does it really do at the end of the day when you're supporting these industries that really are not that essential? And there honestly are alternatives to it. When it comes down to it, it's about the almighty dollar and what they can do. And then everyone else has to subsidize that, including, our health and our aquatic ecosystems. And that is something we hope can change. What's going to make it even that much more difficult, of course, now we're in a world that's facing severe future consequences from climate change and sea level rise. And so all of those kinds of things are now added on top of our poor behavior and our inability to grow sustainably. There are ways to do it. I work many years in the state government agencies, and part of what I did was to work with development applications and developers and so forth. And there were a number of them that we sat down with and worked out a future growth effort that was sustainable and actually can make things better along the way while still letting them, have a reasonable, return on their investment. It is possible to do, but sadly, our legislature continued to change our laws. They took away what was the Department of Community Affairs that helped with overall state growth management. They weakened the growth management laws. And so they basically just made it easier for polluters to do and to pollute more and to make more money and take that money out of our economy. And then all of our citizens and our wildlife are left holding the bag.
Right. I mean, on the ground in Florida now, do you feel like there is a growing awareness among Florida residents that the systems which are designed to protect their health and interests are faulty, to say it nicely maybe, and there's sort of a growing sense that we have to do something about this? Do you think that there's a growing urgency, or would you say that people are still not really getting it?
I think there is a growing urgency. It's sort of in people's faces now because it's gotten so bad, and that's a tragedy of these kinds of losses. And I think the sort of iconic nature of manatees, which wasn't that way, 50 years ago when I started on those. We've taken a lot of effort to try to connect in people's minds this docile, manatee that depends on a natural ecosystem in balance and so forth. And that can be that sort of, a word came to me that I hadn't actually applied to manatees before when I was talking to you. It's kind of like they're one of those Zen species that, people can just relax with. And if we can move this back, and I hope people will be mad as I am. I'm mad, I'm sad, I'm angry. I'm also at my core a scientist, so I'm always going to stay with the science. I'm also someone who never believes in the end justifying the means, so we've also always have to have honorable methods and how we get to the end point to protect these defenseless animals and our aquatic ecosystems. But the science is on our side. It's clear why these problems exist, and it should be clear to anybody who cares about Florida and its environment that is the fact that Florida hasn't protected it incrementally along the way is why we're starting to see these collapses. We had a precursor of this in Tampa Bay in the 50s and 60s when they dredged and filled and put the sewage waste right into the bay. They lost about 60 or 85% of the seagrasses back then. And in the 70s, they woke up to that, started doing better. But it's kind of like we've forgotten now how bad things can get. And there's this East Coast reminder. And it's over 152 miles long as the Indian River Lagoon. But in the northern end, and let's make sure it's not just big sugar, it's not just phosphate, but every yard, and when people fertilize within their yards, and that waste, that fertilizer can make it into the bay, those hundreds of thousands to millions of backyards, if you will, are part of the problem too. They're not bad people. They just probably don't understand that cumulative nature of adding up all that fertilizer for just to have a little greener lawn. Maybe we ought to rethink that very carefully. And it's going to take individual responsibility. Then it doesn't relieve, of course, the municipalities. They've got to treat their water to an advanced wastewater standard. And then we deal, of course, with agriculture too. But they're all contributing to the problem.
I think you just raised a thought for me that I think is so interesting that I'd never thought of before, that Florida sort of is unique in that sense that because the land is so flat, because there is so much water, and therefore, more mobility of these chemicals and things throughout the ecosystems, it's kind of a unique place for this, and it is going to be you're going to see the effects of your actions much more quickly than if you're maybe in the cornfields of Nebraska and it can absorb maybe in a different way or be sort of shuttled away more easily. But I'd never thought of that before. Really, Florida kind of is unique in that sense.
And so there are efforts to get a lot of those septic tanks off and put onto sewer and advanced wastewater treatment. But there's such a backlog of that. It will take so long to do. And of course now everything comes down to money when it comes to that. And so we're making progress. And I think the example of what's going now is highlighting it. We're getting some support within the Florida legislature. Our governor is really trying to make clean water a priority. but I think there's still more they have to do. We can't just accept Band-Aid treatments. We've got to look at fixing this. And even on a federal level, you think about the talk about infrastructure funding and things. Bridges are important, highways are important, but so is how you do your human waste. Where when you go to the bathroom and you put it in a system that takes that waste, and in essence, it makes it little finer particles, but the nitrogen and the phosphorus, they make it into the groundwater, and that makes it into these bays and lagoons and estuaries. And it's really that's what's leading to those harmful algal blooms that can, at the minimum, kill the seagrass. It can burn your eyes. It can, cause other problems, even with drinking water issues ultimately. But you think about Florida and the diverse ecosystem, whether it's the dolphins or the rays or the fishes and all those things, they're all being impacted by this.
Yeah. I had another thought too that I'd never thought of as you were speaking, that manatees, to me, have kind of always felt like this bellwether species where it's, we can almost look to the health of their populations to see how we're doing in our relationship to nature, uniquely in Florida. But then the thought that I'd never had was, it's almost as though if we can find a way to protect them, their ecosystems, their longevity, the quality of their life, then we'll teach ourselves how to protect ourselves. Like the things that will save the manatee are the things that will save us and our waters and all of the ecosystems around them, because they're so connected to the coast. They're such close neighbors to humans. So, what we see happen to them essentially is happening to us. And if we can turn it around, we also turn it around for ourselves.
Absolutely. And that's really been my life mission. So again, for me, that has been that connectedness, to be able to work towards that. And it's sad that we sometimes can't just get people motivated only because it would maybe make their life better, honestly. But if they can see, and I think the manatees are a really good species in the sense that, like we talked about early on, the scars on them. They didn't get those because they swam too fast and got cut on the side of a rock. Those happened because of humans driving boats and hitting them. Again, not on purpose. So some of the boaters have been some of the best people when it comes to wanting to help clean up the water and the environment. They recognize that because they're out in the water. So that's a good connection. They report sick or injured manatees. And that's what I want to make sure we get in, the fact that whatever I've done it with many other people in the course of my more than 45 years of working professionally. We have a really important group that's called the Manatee Rescue and Rehabilitation Partnership. It's made up of the state and the federal government, but on top of that, it's our zoos and aquariums and other organizations like Save the Manatee Club, which we're one of the founding members, and we now are the fiduciary sponsor for that effort. But that's how the manatees get rescued. They get brought into a facility to help take care of them. And with so many dying and so many sick and the malnutrition and starvation, we've been really overloaded. And so great efforts are being made now to increase the capacity. But we know we can do that if we get to those manatees in time. And at the same time, we're also then, as they're nursed back to health, they're being returned to the wild. We'll often have them tagged with transmitters and follow them. It doesn't hurt them. It's just a belt that goes around the narrow part of their tail just before the flat paddle portion of it. And there's a tether and then a floating transmitter. And that can keep track of them by satellite. When we know they're doing well and they've adapted back into the wild environment, then those tags are removed and they're used for the next set of manatees. But without that, we would be even dropping further in terms of the future for manatees. And that helps us both from a science, but also from just understanding that manatee is well enough now that it can be off and on its own again.
Yeah, and it just makes me think even more that manatees in some kind of way, I don't know, we can go spiritual for a second maybe, but it's almost like they are coming to us and saying, we're going to interact with you whether you like it or not, and you can't get away from us. We're going to come to you, and we're going to come to you peaceably, and we're going to show you who you're being, and we're going to show you how you've made us either dependent on you or how you're affecting our populations. I don't know, it just feels like this species which is giving us this generous opportunity to get it right. We're not going to judge you. We're not going to be aggressive no matter what you do, but we're here and you can't ignore us. And I don't know, maybe some people would think I'm crazy for saying that, but I just can't help but feel like there's something kind of really special there involved with this species.
Well, I don't know if I can put it exactly into words, but I identify with what you're saying. And I've always believed that manatees were showing us the way that we could live our lives in peace. And the way they, evolved, and with the seagrass communities actually benefiting the seagrass meadows when they fed, because they didn't stay in one place. They move around, and it's kind of nomadic in that sense. And they didn't have to be aggressive. They didn't have to develop, any of those other tendencies. And it's wonderful too to see, and I've studied manatees and alligators together as well. You'll see these big 12, 13-foot alligators, and a manatee comes up. It might only be an adolescent. Maybe he's 8 feet, but they'll just move out of his way, give him. And then some of those younger manatees like that will play with the alligators because they're curious with them and so forth. So they have no fear of them. They have to learn fear of boats and those kinds of things. But it is something peaceful about seeing that. And I like to share the thought that if they can share our waterways, and with sharks even, then why can't humans and manatees and all those share our waterway in a more respectful and peaceful way?
Absolutely. Yeah, I love that there's never been a record of a shark bite on a manatee ever, to our knowledge, which is like...
So if a manatee carcass was there or something, we've had sharks, eat on a carcass. And there could have been a bite now and then, but it's so very rare. And really, more alligators attack the transmitters that are floating behind because they're bobbing around and so forth. We've lost quite a few transmitters from the alligators trying to do that.
Nice.
But they're not attacking the manatee.
Well, Patrick, while we've still got some time, I really want to ask you, as a scientist, as a citizen, as a conservationist, what are the solutions that you see? Sort of both, I would say, for your organization and you individually, what are you all working on specifically in your kind of lane? But also, as a citizen, what would you say to others about the solutions that are within their grasp as far as how they can get involved?
Yeah, so we love people when they will come to our website and learn a backstory on why we're where we are, maybe where we've come from. We'll also give direction on who they can write and contact. And in this case, we're asking folks to write the governor, to write the president, and of course, always to keep up with their elected officials. And of course, like today, any opportunity we can to share with other user groups and so forth what's going on and what's being done, that's really important. And then the key word, though, for right now is partnerships for us. We are working with dozens and dozens of other environmental organizations and agencies and groups, and we want to help be that catalyst to, I guess in a good way, take advantage of the concern that people have for manatees and let that spill over to absolute concern for the aquatic ecosystem. And so by getting all these different partners sort of working together for a common cause, I think we really do have an opportunity to make a big enough difference that we can prevent this from happening in other parts of the state, and also while we're looking at recovering and restoration of the Indian River Lagoon, which at the end of the day does save manatee lives, but it also saves all these other creatures in the process. Our governor appointed a blue-green algae task force, and they've come up with a lot of recommendations, but those recommendations are not going very well in the legislature. So they could also write to every representative, whether it's their House or their Senate member, and urge them to pass those measures that are being recommended by the blue-green algae task force as well. So there's a couple of specific things. Thankfully, another bill sponsor is pulling their bill. That we actually had a bill go forward this session that was going to make it easier to destroy more seagrasses under the pretense that you would then have mitigation banks developed to replant seagrasses someplace else. Well, that's just a formula for disaster. So we think that's going to go away, thankfully.
Yeah. And there's something I haven't quite asked you yet, which I should, and that's what is some of the work on the ground that your organization does, that Save the Manatee does?
Well, so one of our longest standing projects in terms of research is at Blue Spring State Park. And so we have a researcher there who has been ongoing for probably right about 40 years now, and individually identify each of those manatees that are there, keep track of when they're pregnant and what offspring they have, look for injuries, report any manatees that would need help or what have you. And of course, we also have worked really strenuously to protect the water flow in the spring, protect our aquifers that is the life-giving blood to all of our springs in Florida. It is our drinking water, but we sure can't overpump it, which has happened in some places. So we work really hard on that. We have a case that we look at litigation as a last resort, but sometimes we have to do it. And one of the things we did a little over a year ago is we sued the state agency responsible for water quality under what are called the Basin Management Action Plans, which is to protect those watersheds that were also, in this case, those for the springs in Florida, because the standards are not strong enough there on a state level. Don't want to get in too much into the weeds, but if we can't do it through public hearings, we can't do it through legislative processes, then we'll do it through the courts, because we can't afford those things to be gone away, to go away without ever fighting every element that we can. And we believe we have the science on our side. So that goes back to the case we filed with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to protect manatees' critical habitat, the seagrass beds, the other natural springs and those things. That's a case that's active right now, because that same organization are the ones that we believe did not, they shouldn't have downlisted manatees when they did. They're the ones that ignored the losses of the seagrass. So we're doing that, but our hopes is to resolve that case with them, agree on a settlement, and then move forward together as partners in the issue with the EPA to get them to increase the water quality. So those are some of the other things, but we're involved in local government permits, whether it's for a new marina or development or other activities. So kind of anywhere that something's going on in Florida that's going to affect the manatee's quality of life or the health of our aquatic ecosystems, one way or another, Save the Manatee Club is going to be involved with that. But we don't do it by ourselves. As I said before, we work in partnership with lots of other organizations to do that.
Yeah, yet again, making sure that aquifers and water sources are protected for manatees ensures that they're protected for humans too.
Exactly.
So Save the Manatee is doing work for the entire population of Florida and anyone who visits, in addition to protection of the manatee.
Absolutely, and that is that's our core mission of our organization. So it's to protect those aquatic ecosystems that go along with it. It's in our mission statement, and it's how we live and how we function.
And folks can obviously learn a lot more by visiting your website, and then also, I would imagine, donate to the organization. There's an Adopt a Manatee program, I believe. So I would really encourage people to go on to savethemanatee.org to learn more about how you can get involved and be part of this really important conversation right now.
And that's kind of one of the more fun ways, if they can learn about an individual manatee, and we have their long life histories. We have more than a handful of manatees that are approaching 60 years old at least, because they were first identified and known in 1970, for example. I started visiting some of these places in the 60s. It sort of goes back for me, and I turned 71 this year, and more than a year ago, I thought I might be thinking of retiring. Now, with all that's going on, I just can't even think about it. So I don't know when that's going to happen. So I'm putting priority to and trying to mentor more and get them in a position to carry forward, because sadly we're not done.
Yeah, no, well, I have to say thank you for your service to all of us, and especially to manatees, Patrick. It sounds like it's inspiring and fulfilling work for you, so I hope it's okay to postpone your retirement, but we need you, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you for recognizing that, and I just know that I can't take my mind off of it. So
yeah.
So it's just not the right thing for me now. So hopefully we'll get these things turned around enough, get them in control, that I can just stay engaged, maybe part-time, and have a little of the other. But most importantly, I'm doing what I really want to do every day right now.
Yeah, well, yeah, and you deserve to have that downtime someday, certainly. Well, I think just as we wrap up, the thing that I think gave me the most hope from our conversation is what you were saying about the collaboration with multiple protection organizations within communities. I think it's that awakening that's happening around the world, and that movement that's starting to come together of many organizations working together collaboratively to say we must protect everything, and residents and citizens coming together and saying we have to get involved, we have to get our hands dirty, stop letting the politicians, tell us they're taking care of it when they're clearly not, or stop asking corporations to make changes that they're not making or prepared to make unless we really hold them accountable. And I think that's the movement that's building now, and if we can just keep building it, we're going to reach a tipping point, and we'll stop ignoring these important things and really start to take action and turn the tide, really.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think people are realizing that when you support the manatees' healthier aquatic ecosystem, it actually helps their quality of life. The things that are really endangering their quality of life are those big businesses that are making these profits and they're not paying their way. And so I think they are getting that now. They're kind of being, taken advantage of. And so the more people realize that to join with this cause to protect the environment is going to help their quality of life, I think we'll get it done.
Yeah, I do too. And what's the point of trying unless we've got hope and a vision?
Right, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Patrick. I really appreciate your time today, and it's been wonderful learning from you and learning about things on the ground in Florida.
Well, thank you, Nathan. Appreciate your time today.
I recently watched a news story about the manatees in Florida. It was a relatively short clip that sort of provided an overview of some of what we spoke about with Patrick, but I felt it was incomplete. The news story focused on two aspects of what's going on: human behavior and the problems that we're creating. But it left out the two most important pieces of the story, if you ask me: information about the manatees and the solutions available to us, the ways that we can stop causing problems. I think it's no longer enough to tell incomplete stories like this. When we talk about a problem, we have to talk about the solution. When we tell our story and the way that we're behaving, we have to tell the story of the lives that we're impacting with our actions, lives like those of the manatees and other wildlife, local ocean life and plant life, forests, waterways, and soil. This goes beyond Florida and those local ecosystems. It's time for a more holistic conversation across the board, I think, so that the ripples of every action we take and every choice we make become clear to us as we talk about it, so that we're never left with a sense of hopelessness or confusion around the action we can take to make things better right now. Possible solutions given to us at every turn, built into the conversation. Let's focus on more than just our faults and ourselves. And let's intentionally include the lives that we're affecting, that we're connected to, and the solutions available to us from now on. Which takes us to our changemakers for today, our 3 takeaways inspired by today's guest. Changemaker number 1, we are the problem, but we are also the solution. I think this idea is so perfectly illustrated by the manatees in Florida. The story of the manatee is like a snapshot of our relationship to nature itself over the last century, in a way. We were causing intense harm earlier in the 20th century, in the 1970s, to manatee populations, to the point where we almost lost them in Florida. But through awareness and education and intention and fighting to protect them, we were able to recover the manatee populations so that they could rebound and grow up to 10 times as many as we had in the 70s over the subsequent 5 decades. The population really was growing strong. We may have been the problem, but we became the solution. As we spoke about with Patrick, manatees carry the scars of humanity's relationship to wildlife and to nature. It's visible evidence of the harm that we are capable of and that right now we're doing. But we have done some incredible and inspiring work to not only protect manatees, but protect ecosystems, other wildlife, natural habitats, plants, as well around the world. And we're doing amazing, inspiring work to ensure that manatees and other living things have a home alongside our own. We are both the problem and the solution. The choice in front of us right now is, will we continue to teeter somewhere between destroying life and exploiting it, and protecting it, and valuing it, sort of towing the line and barely keeping ourselves in balance or not keeping ourselves in balance at all? Or will we finally move more clearly and permanently toward valuing our planet more than valuing unlimited development or valuing convenience and corporate profits? If that's the choice we wish to make, to move more decisively in that direction, we've got to make it soon. It's time to define the role that we wish to play, which takes us to changemaker number 2 for today. It's not too late, but we're getting close. If we can manage to turn things around, though, it will change everything. Patrick made a really powerful point, I think, about manatee protection and what it's going to take to solve the problems at the root causes that led to the starvation of over 1,100 manatees. In the 1970s, manatees were saved from extinction due to educational programs and awareness programs around safe boating. It was a simpler solution to a big and pressing but simpler problem. The problems now are much bigger, with complex causes and solutions, which will require a collaborative and holistic effort between citizens, governments, and corporations, something that I think may be unprecedented, at least to my knowledge, so far in the world. To really see business and government and local citizens come together around a conservation project, we need to solve water quality, pollution, unsustainable growth, corporate malpractice with no accountability, weak governmental regulation, daily actions by residents, waste management, and more if we're going to tackle the true causes of habitat loss in Florida, as the example here. But imagine if we did it. Imagine if we truly chose to look hard and honestly at these problems and commit ourselves to solving them. What would we learn? What would we preserve? And what kind of precedent would we set if we started by doing this successfully in Florida and then used that example to show ourselves what's possible and apply it in other situations? It's going to be hard. It's going to take time, years, and we're going to have disagreements and losses and challenges along the way. But if we can learn to protect the manatee and the ecosystems that it inhabits and ensure its long-term survival by literally cleaning up our act and benefiting thousands of plant and animal species in the process, we will show ourselves what we're capable of in taking a dire situation and turning it around. Let's take that opportunity, which takes us to our final changemaker for today. It's time to get serious about the action we'll take now. Have you ever read or seen The Lorax by Dr. Seuss? It was one of my favorites as a kid. It's the story of a creature called the Lorax, who spoke for the trees and wild animals in his part of the world. He fought to protect clean air, clean water, the land, and the wildlife from exploitation by a business person who came in and saw only money and monetary value in the land. The Lorax spoke up at every opportunity. He got in the way. He got annoying. He got angry. And he only gave up when there was nothing left to protect. It's time for us to become the Lorax every opportunity we get. It's time to understand that the fight to protect the manatee, the fight to protect wild salmon, the fight to protect the orangutan, the fight to protect the dolphin is a fight to protect ourselves. I remember when I was a kid growing up, we had a creek behind our house. And when I was younger, there were frogs, tadpoles, crayfish, which are like little almost kind of shrimp, like large shrimp if you've never seen a crayfish, as well as other small fish and wildlife in that creek. Then, one year, a bunch of oil and waste was dumped into the creek. We saw the pollution floating down the water. And we never found out who did it or how or why it happened, but the creek was never the same after that 1 year. There haven't been frogs, crayfish, or any kind of fish in the creek since. Just ducks who have always come to rest and drink in the water. It broke my heart as a kid. And I made a choice then and there, which I still remember, to speak up for nature every opportunity I had for the rest of my life. Something at my core knew that it was wrong. How many more stories like this are we going to have to tell and to see before we get the memo from nature that it's time to change our course? How much loss of life will we watch over? How close will we bring ourselves to harm as we ignore the needs of life around us, which, again, is essentially ignoring our own needs in the long term? Loss of life is loss of life is loss of life. Let's ensure our story has a different ending than the Lorax. Let's fight to protect what matters, which includes what we need to survive, before it's too late, so that we can look around and take pride in our Earth and what we've protected and what we maintain, instead of having to give up when there's nothing left. Let's be the voice for the voiceless, each in our own way, starting now, starting today. Here's what you can do to get involved today. Obviously, not all of us are in Florida. I'm not in Florida. So learn more about your local ecosystems. Are there conservation programs in your community? Is there a local body of water that certain people are fighting to protect for the wildlife there? Even something as small as a pond or a stream. Is there a restoration program that you can get involved with or become aware of? How can you add your contribution to local initiatives in your area to protect ecosystems that matter? You can also refrain from using chemical fertilizers on your lawn in any form, especially if you live in areas that are close to natural waterways like lakes and rivers, streams, creeks, and oceans. As Patrick said, the ingredients in fertilizers can be really disruptive to water systems and ecosystems, so refrain from using them. And if you need fertilizer in some form, find a natural alternative, an organic or compost-based fertilizer. Learn more about local species in your area. Find something like the manatee that's unique to your area, and see if there is a conversation around how to protect them. If there is, get involved. We're calling our challenge for you today the Lorax Challenge. Adopt a cause. You don't have to adopt the manatee, although this is inspired by the Save the Manatee Club adoption program. Just adopt a cause that speaks to you. Pick something that's personal for you. Maybe it's an animal species, a local ecosystem, a plant species that you've always found really beautiful. Become an expert in whatever cause you choose, in that animal, that plant, that ecosystem. What is contributing to successes when it comes to this choice that you've made, and what is contributing to struggles? What are the solutions to those struggles? And how can you become a voice in the conversation around this topic? How can you bring more awareness to it or advocate for positive change? How can you be the Lorax for this place or this living thing that you've adopted? Treat it as though it's a member of your family. Really ignite your passion for it by learning more about whatever you've chosen, and then share the conversation with those close to you. Invite others to connect with it in the way that you have. Whatever choice you make, we'd love to hear about it on social media. You can find us on Twitter at WCR2W Podcast, or on Instagram, We Can Remake the World, and in our Facebook community. Let us know what you've chosen. Educate us on the topic that you've picked. If you'd like to support our guest, visit savethemanatee.org to learn more about the work that this important organization is doing for manatees and for Florida at large, and to learn more about the manatees themselves. Dig into their resources about how unique manatees are and why it's so important to support them. You can, of course, donate to the Save the Manatee Club. You can adopt a manatee to get a little more personal. And you also can take action if you live in Florida by writing to your local politicians, your state politicians, your federal politicians. Support the work of Save the Manatee Club on the ground by volunteering if you're close enough to their center or to some of the coastlines to do so. The Center for Biological Diversity is another conservation organization that Save the Manatee Club works with, and they do a lot of great work too. They're the ones supporting the legal action that Save the Manatee Club is putting out there. So learn more about their projects as well, and get involved if you can. March is Seagrass Awareness Month, and March 30th, this week, is Manatee Appreciation Day, which is partly why we wanted to make sure this episode came out today. So there's a lot of great resources available to you if you'd like to learn more about these important ecosystems and about manatees. We will put links on our website on today's episode page for you to learn more as well, to make it easy for you. There's a lot of really great resources that we found online to talk more about these conversations in Florida, what's contributed to some of the problems, and what the solutions look like. and how you can get involved. Learn more, get educated, and make your impact today. I was once told by an old boss of mine that my spirit animal was the Lorax. This is before I started this podcast. I didn't even really speak all that openly about nature or wildlife or anything at that point. I guess he was just clicking into something. Well, today is my Lorax episode. I care about every living thing and every ecosystem on this planet, every person too. But when it comes to manatees and redwood trees, I get emotional. I get angry, frankly, when I learn about some of these things and how careless and short-sighted we can be as humans. And I get frustrated by our lack of caring, by our apathy, and by what we allow to go on in our world sometimes. And I'm not planning to shut up about it anytime soon, just like the Lorax. But I'm also hopeful because I know we can do better. There's evidence of that. There are people who are showing us the way. And I really believe most of us want to do better. We want to contribute to solutions. We just need some help to get started. We need examples. We need inspiration. I'm doing what I can to help others feel empowered, to encourage all of us to make better, more informed choices. We are doing that with this show as best as we can. Now it's your turn. Share our episode with others. Take action today. Get involved. Grow these conversations. Make this a priority for you. Get your hands into the clay as we redefine and reshape our world into something better, as we remake this world. Don't let this opportunity to be part of the solution pass you by. Don't allow yourself to miss this moment and look back one day and say, I wish I had done more. I wish I had cared more. I could have done more. Give yourself the opportunity to look back and say instead, I did everything I could. And I couldn't control all of the outcomes, but I could control some of what happened, and here's how I made a difference. What a powerful thing to be able to say. Thank you for being with us today. Tune in 2 weeks for our episode featuring Some of Us, a global network which includes over 20 million people who are holding corporations accountable and demanding that they do better and that we all do better. It's an exciting conversation featuring 3 members of the Some of Us team, and we're so excited to share it with you. Until then,